Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing? It's really beautiful to see all your faces. First of all, I'm really honored to be here and to share a little bit of my experience in the movement. Obviously, what was said earlier that we're not the experts. There are a lot of you that have paved the way for us, as well as there are many of you that I have walked along the protest lines with. So I'm grateful for that. Leslie said her portal into the movement was through Ferguson, and my portal into the movement was really through a lived experience, having the duality of the victim and the offender in my life growing up, and having a sister buried on my 17th birthday really kind of gave me an awakening to dedicate my life to fighting injustice and everything that I grew up knowing to be true, and that was being racially profiled, hogtied by police, identified or maybe told that we were gang members when we were really basketball players wearing red uniforms. And so for me, leaving the environment that I grew up in with all the violence, gang violence, domestic violence, trauma, allowed me to then really work on myself. And I went away to a university, UC Santa Cruz, and I studied under magnificent professors like Angela Davis, Aida Hurtado, Craig Haney. But I think what's really interesting is that cultivation of my leadership and just radical consciousness by these individuals is kind of what's led me to be crazy enough to be part of leading a 250-mile march from New York City to DC. But also my involvement with Ferguson was very different than many of those that maybe came up here. I work for Harry Belafonte. I've been with him for now about 14 years. I'm now his executive director, working directly with him for 10. And I run the Gathering for Justice, where we work on introducing nonviolence as a foundation to civic engagement and political action across the country, working in prisons and marginalized communities, as well as going into prisons overseas in Venezuela and El Salvador. But Ferguson for me was a place where I think we were able to bear witness firsthand to what others may have seen on television. And I was asked to go to Ferguson by my mentor and boss with Jasiri X and David Banner to really kind of understand the dynamics of what was going on the first weekend after Michael Brown had died. And as I was there, I didn't go in with my national organizer or executive director or founder of Justice League hat. I went in as a healer because the Gathering for Justice is a national social justice movement grounded in spirituality, nonviolence, and culture. And what I knew I needed to do for my folks that were on the ground, like Benjiwe and Philip Agnew, was to remove them from the situation, to actually create a space for them where they could then rejuvenate their spirits to go back every single day and organize in the trenches. And so I was able to do that because my childhood friend lived in St. Louis, and so we used her home as a place to bring other activists, to have a meal, to have a bed, because as activists, we don't necessarily have much money. We don't have the resources. Nobody really believes that the work that we do are actual jobs, and people should get paid for it. And so that's how much we value and devalue human life. But so I went to Ferguson, and I was able to meet amazing young people like Tep Pole and Tori and Ashley, and kind of learn from them and what they needed as far as support. And as far as I know, there are a lot of organizations that were already organizing there and supporting some of these individuals. And then also going onto the street of Florissant and seeing the police and the militarization of the police and the way in which they actually just treated regular folk. It was really harsh for us being out there with Reverend Sekou, walking the streets and being yelled at and confronted with heavy machinery, There was moments, I remember there was one night when we were out there, we had just left a restaurant, David Banner, myself, Jasiri X, and several of us that had been organizing for now 15 years, had all been in Ferguson and had reunited after maybe 7 years we hadn't seen one another. So we had broken bread and we were right across the street from the McDonald's, and all of a sudden there was these two young men that were from a street organization, the Bloods and the Crips, and they came to say what's up to us. They just kind of came, they recognized us from the day before. Everybody kind of recognized David Banner, and so they wanted to, just talk to him. And all of a sudden, there were police officers that were beasts. I mean, I don't know where they bred these men, but they were about 6'4", 6'5", and 40 of them came from the right, the direction from the right, and then another 40 came from the left, and they just swarmed us. And as they're swarming us, the two young men start running with their hands up, and it just seemed like if it was a scene from a movie. And it was so unreal, it was so crazy. Everybody starts running, people are throwing their hands up. And I remember seeing, I think it was Chief Dotson, the person who had been dealing with us for a couple days already. And I ran to him and I asked him what had happened, and he had called them agitators. But nobody, it was just insane. But also I think, although it was insane and it was crazy with the police, there was so much courage that came from the young people. And that really, I think, ignited something different in me. I'm an organizer, I work in prisons, I work with men, I try to bring hope. I also work on changing policies, but never did I really consider myself a protester, although I've protested with my mother and I've marched along her side for her cause, but never did I ever see myself on the forefront of the movement, chanting and taking the streets over. And so after I left Ferguson, we had then began some meetings in our office to offer support, and then the non-indictment of Officer Daniel Pantaleo hit here in New York City. And I'm also the co-founder of Justice League NYC, which is a group of organizers, formerly incarcerated individuals, artists, activists that have come together to awaken the moral consciousness of our city. And we had been organizing around a 3-day conference called Growing Up Lockdown in September. It was a 3-day conference that we had just finished, but immediately after, we were then preparing to organize Justice Summits. But then the non-indictment hit, and we started receiving phone calls and text messages, and people were saying, what are we gonna do? And we took to the streets, and we never left. We organized some of the shutdowns here, the economic shutdown, where we shut down the Apple store for 11 minutes, the amount of times that Eric Garner said he couldn't breathe. We also shut down the Macy's store. We did die-ins in each place. We did the royal shutdown. But most recently, I think what I also want to add is that the climate, the climate of New York City at that moment, there was this rage, right, that we all had, and there was an opportunity, there was this collective that allowed us to take to the streets, to build community, to build the beloved community that Saba talks about in regards to us coming together. But then the two officers end up getting killed. And all of a sudden, the mayor and several other elected officials put a moratorium on protest. And meanwhile, as we're organizing a lot of these different protests and participating in other people's protests, we participated in the Millions March NYC that was put on by two young women. But after that, there was this sense of defeat, right? And although we were organizing around against the mayor, we were looking at doing a shutdown in front of his house, we then decided to do a silent vigil and go to a church to really have some form of spiritual connection, because in this movement, what I know many of you understand is that you also get death threats. And there are some of us, particularly myself and just some of the leaders like Tamika, that were getting death threats during that time. We had been targeted by Pat Lynch. We were told that the blood of the 2 police officers were on the hands of the mayor and the protesters. We were also being targeted by Blue Lives Matter. There was at that moment a counter protest by the police that was "I Can Breathe." And so there was a lot going on, a lot during the holidays. And mind you, we were December 3rd up into the holidays, we are out on the streets every single day, in the snow, in the rain, whatever it may be. But it was really that moment when I was in Ferguson that allowed me to not stop, allowed all of us to not stop. It was that connection to the people, connection to those that felt as though there was no other option. And so although there was a moratorium that was put on by the mayor and we were being questioned, how could you guys be so disrespectful and continue to have a vigil or continue to protest, we felt that although those 2 officers had been killed, it was not mutually exclusive to mourn the deaths of both, right? Eric Garner, and seeking justice for Eric Garner and the 2 officers. And so during that time, I had also participated in a delegation to Palestine with the Dream Defenders. And so I was able to kind of learn and meet other organizers, but then we came back to and held a Dream for Justice March on MLK Day that allowed a lot of us that had been feeling defeated during the end of December and the holidays come back and have hope. And from that moment on, I'll allow Tamika Mallory to share the story of how we marched from New York to DC, and just truly honored to be here. And so I'm happy, to also answer any questions and continue the conversation.
Okay, Tamika.
Thank you. So I will be brief, and I think Carmen did a very good job of sort of explaining some of how we came together. First of all, good afternoon to everyone who's here. And as Carmen said, it's really wonderful to be in a space where there's so many different people coming together under this sort of Black Lives Matter banner. And it's although we know that in the movement there's been times when lots of people have had to come together in order for us to progress, there's certainly something special about what's happening today. And I think Ferguson sort of really it resembles that, or gives us that space where we look at a place and a time that we can point to where people decided to put down their comfortability and their biases to come together to fight together. And so, even though I was not in Ferguson, I did not go to Ferguson. I watched from my home, from my bed, and I cried and I felt terrible every single day watching what was happening there. I didn't run to Ferguson because I knew that Carmen and so many other people were already on the ground, and I think sometimes we can get in the way when we try to run into someone else's space and lead or run their operation or run their movement, and I have the tendency to be pushy. So I know sometimes I need to be quiet and stay behind and help do things from my home. I didn't work, I didn't do anything during that time. I've been in the movement now for almost 20 years. I started out as one of Reverend Sharpton's first members of his his organization, National Action Network, which he started about 25 years ago. My parents were 2 of his members, and they took me from one place that he was in to another place and helped him to build that organization. So when I see June up there, I've been one of the members. And so I was sort of just born and raised in the movement. That's all I know. That's all I've ever really done, just being an activist. And so while I didn't go to Ferguson, I've been in the belly of Ferguson's all my life. I think when you look at the Sean Bell movement here in New York, it was another one of those moments where young people particularly turned out and poured into the streets, and it was, for me, probably one of the most motivating experiences in terms of my activism, because I was looking at people very young who looked like me, who understood that we had to fight, and we had to be very serious and dedicated to the movement at that time. And I met people in the Sean Bell movement who had never done anything, had never been engaged, sort of like Ferguson, had never been engaged in a movement, but they still are here today. People who I still see in different fights. And so there are those moments in time. And I would say that Sean Bell certainly was that for me. But the other side, and Carmen talks about the duality of having these different experiences in your life. And for me, I come before being an activist, before being any of those things. The first thing that I am is the mother of a 16-year-old black boy. My son, Tariq Ryans, is everything to me. Yep, 16, yep, 16. I'm old. Just look young. And I don't know how that's possible when you work with black folks all the time, but somehow we do it. But anyway, and so I look at him as the first thing that gets me up every day. When I look at my son, I realize that he could be Mike Brown, he could be Trayvon Martin, he could be any one of these people any day. And so I have to get up, even if I don't care anymore about the movement. If I've decided that I no longer want to be a part of this, I just want to go make millions of dollars and go focus on something else, then I turn around and my son walks up in my face, and I realize once again I have no choice, because I have to try to protect my child. But why am I so protective? I'm protective because I'm a single mom. Well, why am I a single mom? Because my son's father, when my son was 2 years old, was found dead in a ditch in Pennsylvania. He had been dead there for 2 weeks. He'd been executed because he was involved in illegal activity, and the people who he was down with, hanging with, decided to kill him. And I often tell people that although the police did not kill him, it's still the same thing, the oppression that's happening in communities of color, which always leaves black men in these positions where they're either involved in illegal activity or being killed for something, for being unarmed. There's always some story that's attached to the black man. And so I realized that being a part of the movement at this point for me doesn't just mean that I'm fighting police. I'm fighting oppression at the highest level and systematic racism, because that's how I lost my son's father, as a part of that component. And so it's all connected. And I think that people, as we sit here today and we have a conversation about Ferguson to New York, we also have to look at what's happening after Baltimore. We all went there, and there was an uprising, and they rioted, and they did all of that. But then over the weekend, there's been over 30 people shot in that city. So we have to look at when the police violence part dies down, there's still a movement happening that we must be engaged in. And I think that brings me to why I'm going to hurry up. And it brings me to what Justice League means for me, and what it means for so many people who traveled with us for 250 miles walking from New York City to Washington, D.C., beginning April 13th of this year. Justice League is about transformation on two fronts. It's not just transformation of the criminal justice system, which we know is clearly important, but it's also transformation of community. It's also about injecting love, support, and family and community back into not only the movement, but people who folks don't generally talk to. We get our training and our advice in a lot of ways from young people that other folks have thrown out. People, we can't go into, Carmen can't go into a prison and try to, or go into to the city hall or into an elected official's office and try to argue about what's happening in the detention center if she hasn't talked to the youth that are in there. And so Justice League is made up of people who other folks look down upon and don't allow to be a part of their organization, or they're the ones that can't sit at the table. Whereas in our organization, in this initiative, they're at the head of the table, leading the conversation and giving us the guidance that we need, because they're the ones on the front line. They're living every single day the stories that we talk about, and where we claim we're helping people, they are the ones that are informing us on how to do that. So if I could share anything in this space, because we can all talk about our experiences, what we saw when we were here and there and the third, but it's important for us to take these opportunities, and as you said, people here paid or got up this morning, got dressed, looking good, smelling good, everybody's good, you know, so that therefore we are all leaders, every single person in this room. So what's important is that when we leave this space, and whatever organization, whatever it is that we're in, if we're in that with these biases of, well, if you're not black, you can't lead, or if you're a woman, perhaps you don't know, or, you know, all of these different biases that we come to the space with, we've already started to step backwards from where Ferguson took us. We got so far by a new breed and a new energy of young people who said, we are not going to take it. And then the conversation becomes, so-and-so is not black and she or he should not be leading this movement. And I think that that is foolish for us, that if we're going to do anything, we need to understand that this movement is in many ways informed by what is happening to black people, both men and women, who have suffered police and state violence in this country. However, there are people who are extremely passionate that have the resources and have a lot of things that we need in order to do the work that has to be done. And I think that there has to be a space built for everyone, and I think that other folks, and when we talk about white privilege, very important conversation, I think that, you know, people who are trying to lead have to come to the table and allow those other voices to inform what they're doing. But I don't think that we should be in a space where we're pushing people out or, you know, turning our backs on folks and not willing to collaborate and work together, because that other person's resource sometimes, or their passion, can be stronger than the black person that you're running behind, claiming that you're supporting, who's really leading you into a ditch. So I think that's important. The other thing is, and I think we embody that in Justice League, because there's so many different types of people, all different races, all different sexualities, you name it, we got it in the Justice League. We turn up, we go to the club, but then we go to church and we eat soul food and Indian food, and you know, we do all different types of things. And I think that that is what that's what brings us to this space where we feel really comfortable that what we're doing is really about the people and about the movement, because we've not excluded anyone and we've not kept anyone out of being a part of what it is that we're doing. So if I could just share, and hopefully we are able to you know, come from a place of love, where we're all able to figure out how we can collaborate and work together going forward, because Ferguson was Ferguson, but then it was Baltimore, and it might be Cleveland tomorrow. It's happening all over the country where our people are being oppressed, and therefore our resources and attention and time will be needed in so many different spaces, and there's so much work to do, that I'm hoping that we are able to leave here and leave many rooms that we're all in. We see each other all over, talking about how we collaborate and continue to work together. Thank you.
So let me begin by just thanking many of my comrades who I've struggled alongside for a number of years in this struggle to try to make some sense of the world that we're in. And I would be remiss that if I did not attempt to situate my comments within the framework of this annual leftist family reunion. That the Left Forum is the largest gathering of leftists in America that happens once a year. And so the question before us is that what does our movement have to say about this particular moment? And I want to begin with the presupposition that both Ferguson and Baltimore are an indictment of the American left. That the American left has been preoccupied with lines and not lives, pushing papers and not people. And so as a result of that, they have vacated the space of particularly organizing the black lumpen proletariat. there's not been a significant investment in organizing among the black poor, particularly among the American left, which is the characterization of the broader nation in terms of that the NAACP, the Urban League, have not spent a tremendous amount of time organizing the black poor and those who stand on the right side of American democracy. And without this framework and this lack of infrastructure, particularly of leftist organizing within the context of the black lumpen proletariat, Ferguson emerges. And then part of, before I move to Ferguson, is to help understand that the notion of the part of the struggle that we've lost in the American left has been not only a political struggle, but it has been a discursive struggle. And that at the discursive level, this is what Black Lives Matters is, although it is a regular, obvious statement that the lives of black people that should matter, but it is a discursive intervention. Because our struggle and what we've been losing has been at the existential level, that they have determined the way in which we make meaning for ourselves. If we look at the work of Henry Giroux, in which America is preoccupied with marketing to children, that many of us, those of us who have children, before they can read, they know what a McDonald's sign looks like. And that the level of marketing to preteens and the level of marketing to children has been as such that America has been obsessed with commodification of all that can be bought and sold, which is a feature that Marx articulates for us in terms of commodification as articulated by the capitalist economy. And so within that framework, that our struggle has been an existential struggle. What are the ways in which we make meaning for ourselves in light of circumstances not of our own choosing? And so Black Lives Matter is a discursive intervention that the left was too unimaginative to engage in. This is why the artists have been so significant at this particular moment. Sister Sidney and Sister Umara are artists who called for a march here. Tef Poe, one of the leaders to emerge out of Ferguson, is an artist. Patrice Curlers, who is a playwright, one of the founders of Black Lives Matters. It is the artists who have come to emerge because given the fact that the professional organizing class and the professional leftist class has lost track of the ways in which humans make meaning for themselves in non-material terms. And so the artists and the linguistic and the discursive intervention that Black Lives Matters represents had to happen first. It had to enter into the public space, pierce it, and let us be clear, it is articulated that the days of the cisgendered man leading us to the promised land are over. That we particularly look at who is emerging. So not only artists, we see emerging two queer black women articulating a vision that all black people can get behind. Black Lives Matters. And so as a result of this new formation within the context of late modernity in which the American empire is collapsing, Black Lives Matters is an existential intervention and a discursive intervention. If Black Lives Matters is the word, then Ferguson is the word made flesh. And so by that we mean that Ferguson only emerges out of the fact that there is not a non-profit industrial complex in Ferguson. NAACP, Urban League have no foothold in Ferguson. And so because nonprofits tend to tamper social movement. But what we see emerge in Ferguson is everyday people, black lumpen proletariat, setting the agenda for the nation. Poor people, angry young people in the street, day in, day out, not professional organizers. We're talking about T-Dub and Low Key and Ashley. Everyday people taking to the street and saying, we will not bow down. And then the nonprofits show up, and then the NAACP shows up, then the organizations in the black church, they show up late. But what's unique about Ferguson is that the people who are on the ground and in the street confronting the police every day are also at the White House. This is a unique moment in human history. In fact, we could possibly make the argument that the black lumpen proletariat has not set the agenda for the nation since the slave insurrections. Right. And this is a critical moment. This is what makes Ferguson unique in that sense. Secondarily, Ferguson cannot be understood outside the collapse of the global economy of 2008. Overnight, 40 million people go into poverty because of the financialization of the market without any repercussions of the state in terms of them being arrested or held accountable for violating economic policy in which it sends millions into poverty. And so Ferguson has to be situated within the context and which the ways in which the historically other, particularly those who live under various forms of tyranny, given the flow of global capital. And so the Arab Spring is in part a response to the collapse of the global economy and the ways in which America has supported dictators. So Mubarak is a friend of America, the lumpen proletariat, and our communist comrades in Tahrir Square. Let us be clear that in Tahrir Square, you don't put up 4 stages overnight with Twitter and Facebook. That's labor. Those are labor organizers who have been shutting down the port in Alexandria, and our communist comrades shutting down the ports in Alexandria for over a decade. And so when the young folks say that they're going to resist, take to the streets in Tahrir Square, the labor movement comes and provides the infrastructure. So it's just not simply Twitter and Facebook, but it's low technology, labor-intensive organizing, our comrades of the left inside the Arab world coming to organize for decades and then appropriating in certain ways within this space. And so the ways in which after the global collapse of the economy that the global resistance has taken 2 forms. It has been the occupation of public space, Tahrir Square, West Florissant in Ferguson, PNN North in Baltimore. This has been the occupation of public space and the rejection of traditional leadership. So what is unique about this particular moment in Ferguson is that the rejection of traditional leadership. Al Sharpton can't come on the street at night in Ferguson. Jesse Jackson can't come on the street at night in Ferguson. Because young people look at these traditional forms of leadership who have been morally bankrupt, placating certain forms of the petty bourgeois infrastructure of the Democratic Party, preoccupied with televisual culture in terms of what access to television shows, while the masses of black people are suffering. And so this rejection of traditional leadership has been as such that the young folks hit the street and say that the only way in which leadership has been determined, because the vast majority of leadership in the black community has been determined by televisual access. This is the first time in the history of our people, for the last 50 years, that the vast majority of those who are the most visible don't have real bases. They're on television. I'm guilty of it. I'm guilty of being on television and writing speeches and writing books and that kind of thing. So it has the televisual culture has a way to play. But I do not represent a movement. I'm just a bourgeois intellectual. But the way in which leadership is determined is that what is your proximity to the suffering of everyday people? That is a new intervention within the framework of American society as it relates to social movement. And so the occupation of public space, the rejection of traditional leadership, as well as intersectionality, which has been all the rage among bourgeois intellectuals in the academy for the past decade, has been actually lived out on the street. Queer, black women, single mothers are the leaders of this movement. Now, this is not to say that there's not homophobia, patriarchy, transphobia, and all of that in our movement. But it is to say that what you see embodied on the street, literally confronting the most lethal empire in human history, are queer black women. I take my orders for 23-year-old queer black women. On the street, bringing analysis, intersectional. And that part of what we're seeing, particularly given the sisters who founded Black Lives Matters, one of them works with the domestic workers. The other one works around keeping track of trans bodies and police brutality in Los Angeles. And the other one does black diaspora organizing around immigration. So what we see embodied in the folks who have become the leaders of this movement has been a transnational, queer, womanist, anti-imperialist, and anti-capitalist framework. There's been a group of Marxists who've been meeting for the past decade in a study group in New York City for the past decade. They couldn't have anticipated this. And it's in part because the lumpen proletariat have risen. And the global collapse of the economy, lastly, that Ferguson and Baltimore look more like an intifada than it does the civil rights movement. And it has to do with the way in which militarization has played itself out in the transnational flow of elites and the transnational flow of capital and the transnational flow of international military tactics. So the police in New York and in Ferguson trained in Israel. Same tear gas that was shot at me in Palestine in 2012, the same tear gas by the same company that was shot at us in Ferguson. Same company. Same company that runs the prisons, GS4 is it?
Geo Group. And
Geo Group that runs the prisons, political prisoners in Palestine is the same company that finances the private security company of the individual who shot Von Derek Myers in St. Louis. So given that this the international function of elites, global elites, as it relates to this particular moment in history, has also situated us in a different way in which the intersectionality plays itself out in real ways and in real time. It was the Palestinians who tweeted us and told us how to deal with tear gas. It was 250 Palestinians who marched in the street with us in Ferguson. In Ferguson, it's never been a question that we stand in solidarity with Palestinian self-determination. And so the question for us in this context, particularly among our leftist comrades, right, is what will be the left's response to this particular moment? How will we acknowledge and reject the evangelical tendencies of the American left? We're going to bring radical thought to poor black people. We're going to bring radical thought to these movements. If they would just understand our line, if they just mastered the 1844 manuscripts of Marx. No, the people got what the fuck they need. They have everything they need. The question becomes, what are the ways in which we're going to stand in solidarity with what's already moving on the ground? And so if young poor black people are on the move in Ferguson, how do you not sell your paper, but how do you stand next to them and support them? What are the ways in which you are our proximity to their misery? So oftentimes, you know, these, not the white folks in this room, but other white folks. They tell me they've been to, you know, and I'm going to stop because I know we need to get to some Q&A. But, you know, white folks often tell me, you know, I've been to these anti-racism workshops, which is always an alarm for me. You know, they're going to check their privilege and all that. Ruby Sells, the great freedom fighter as Student Nonviolent Coordinator, says it this way: we don't need freedom fighters. We don't need allies. We need freedom fighters. Because an ally, which is part and parcel of a postmodern discourse, which is predicated on a neoliberal option that's obsessed with individualism. So if I check my individual privilege, right? If I check my individual privilege, it's about checking our privilege, not dismantling white supremacy. And so this idea that, you know, we need more allies, and, you know, and I can't make a decision because I don't want to offend black leadership, and I push the click on move on, and I've made my contribution. It's not about white people feeling guilty for being white. I mean, there's a couple things y'all need to feel guilty about, like Justin Bieber. Whatever meeting y'all had to let that son bitch out. Y'all need to. And I don't understand why white people clap on 1 and 3. It's 2 and 4. It's really simple. And if we can pass legislation on black kids sagging their pants, we should pass legislation on white people clapping in public. So what I'm saying is that what are the ways in which we are going to come to support the various forms of struggle that are happening in part on the ground by getting with, standing with. And so if you consider yourself a quote-unquote ally of black people, the question for me oftentimes is when they tell me they've been to these damn workshops is, have you ever been to a black funeral? Does somebody black love you enough that when they put their mama in the ground, they want you to stand next to them? That's what freedom fighters do. To end on this story, when Antonio Martin was killed, it wasn't a clean killing. Like he may have had a gun, right? As though having a gun justifies you being killed by the police. So he may have had, it wasn't sexy. So I wound up officiating the funeral. And Reverend Renita, as far as I'm concerned, she got more street cred than any black preacher in the whole goddamn town. White sister took a rubber wooden bullet. I've seen a whole 500 of them with her hand just raised. She goes speaking tongues over tanks. She say she's standing between. I asked her, Renita, when you're standing between the protesters and the tanks, what are you doing? Because I'm looking. She said, I'm standing in the gap between heaven and hell. So Reverend Renita, we about to march in the funeral now. This is a black poor family, Antonio Martin's family. If there are 50 people in the family at the funeral, there are 150 from the movement. Queer. You know, all the kids with asymmetrical haircuts. You know, and gender non-conforming. You know, I don't understand. I just call everybody baby. You know, you got pronouns, per, z. Now they got old, I can't remember all that. Just come here. So gender non-conforming, queer folk, you know, head shaved on one side. At this, I ain't talking about nobody, I'm just saying. So at this funeral, and there were no cameras, I made sure there were no cameras there. And we're about to march in, and Reverend Renita says, you know, there's a ritual that we do in the black church around funerals. And Reverend Renita says, I said, well, Reverend Renita, these ain't church folks. Do I need to do the whole shebang? And she looks at me and she says, we bury him properly. And so we gave this kid that they had demonized and called a thug the same ritual that we gave my grandfather. And so then we have the repast. Repast is a cultural practice of African Americans that gather after the death ritual, particularly the burial, at a particular, used at a religious institution as a form of breaking bread in a community. So we're gonna eat. And the repast was run by food, not bombs. So white anarchists, taking the leadership of Mama Cat, she cooked for us all in the movement. We be on the front line, and she be on the back on the grill. Come on, baby, get you some of these ribs. And you going back out there. Run by a black woman, Mama Cat. In a black woman's church, Tracy Blackman, right? Anarchists running it. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's what a movement looks like. When we can bury the lumpen proletariat with dignity. And everyone in the community showed, even anonymous, took their mask off to come into church. That's a level of commitment and a level of solidarity and a level of understanding that we're crafting out a new moment that is primarily led by queer, black, single mothers and women and lumpen proletariat. And that the ways in which our movements can continue to hold open the space for their leadership to emerge, then and only then, we might win.
Yes.
My name is Miguel Adams. Thank you all, everybody for coming. More technique that helped later on. I'm with the movement toward the new Jim Crow. We kicked off 5 years ago when Brother Feld is right there at Riverside Church. Thank you, Brother Feld, for giving out that safe space for us to kick off the movement in Alexander, that's Haiti, and other former incarcerated individuals, the outcasts of our communities, you know, like myself, being former incarcerated and have no space in society. Riverside Church gave us that space to organize. There was a young lady here, I believe it was Carmen Perez, if I'm not mistaken. He mentioned that, I'm sorry, I think it was his sister, yes, that a home was offered to bring activists in. Right? It was you.
Oh, we talked about it.
So we're talking about space. Yeah, we're talking about safe space. And we're talking about going to Ferguson and getting those houses for us to do the proper thing and so on. But now, how do we get safe space here to continue to organize in the tradition of the Black Panthers so we will have those places one which we already opened in Orlando is, struggle because, we lack money, the lump of proletariat, we don't have that, So therefore, one of the things that I will say, how can we, especially organizations, establish organizations, fight for mass security and all that have funders and everything, we collaborate with the local proletariat, form incarcerated, we enter into communities, and we didn't have that safe space, in order to organize, which Riverside Church was grateful enough to offer to us, but it's not available everywhere.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think.
So one of the things is that, so if I might give and this is not to you, dear brother.
Yes.
So I'm hearing something else, not to you. So I just want to give a kind of general caution. Everything you think young people should be doing, they're already doing. So, Hands Up United they just had yesterday their Books and Breakfast program, where Martin Luther Black Panthers, where they're giving out books and feeding young folks, right? Operation Help or Hush, Charles Wade. They have 2 or 3 houses that young organizers can come and stay in around the country. The Fellowship of Reconciliation, we ran an organizing house, right? So I'm saying that like much of your considerations about what is happening on the ground, and the sisters know way more about what's happening in New York, they're already doing it. It's just the question is, what kind of resources can you bring to bear, and how can you stand with them, and oftentimes standing behind them? A lot of the leadership that I know of in Ferguson is formerly incarcerated.
Yeah.
Most of the folks a lot of the folks have done the stretch. And so I think that so there are folks that we can put you in contact with who are already doing that.
I just want to say that, one of the things that we found, marching 250 miles was certainly no easy feat, and the organizing, I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm acting like I'm not loud. I'm loud. But anyway, marching 250 miles certainly was no easy feat, and we had the organizing that went into that. It was difficult, it was challenging at times. But we were able to find accommodations where we slept in churches, basements, and mosques, and universities, community centers. And basically, it was all about using the relationships. We knew who folks were in these different communities. They're the same people all the time. The folks that are out there, the folks that have, that their voices are a part of what it is that we're doing. We tapped into those people, called them and told them what we were doing. There were some people who said no. And there were other people who were quick to work with us. As a matter of fact, I hate to say it, but the truth is that Howard University turned us down. But what was it? Lincoln University, which is one of the oldest, first historical black college, they took us in immediately. So, and with Howard, they claimed that their issue was no time, no space. But some people were like, hey, just jump on the floor right here and we'll just figure it out. And so there are people who are doing that, as the brother is saying, already it's happening. This is all about the relationships that people have. And, we didn't, one of the things that I think is important also to talk about is like when Howard said no, we didn't go online and talk about how bad Howard is. Like that wasn't the strategy. We just know now that they were not willing to allow us to stay there. We know it, and now I say it in these kind of spaces so that everybody else knows it. But it wasn't our strategy to go out and try to blast people. So I think it's also a matter of like how we approach situations with people, that we understand we need something, you need something, and we're going to work together. And people really basically opened up to us, and they fed us. I mean, we ate. When y'all talk about, we ate everywhere we went. People fed us, but we found people who are a part of the Black liberation movement all over the country. So those people exist.
And just to add, when I talked about creating safe space for my colleagues, for my comrades, it's because that's what I'm taught by my elder to do, right? So I'm accountable to Harry Belafonte, to Nane Alejandro's. I have a council of elders that have given me the teachings to create a space for healing and spirituality. And I know you were asking about that, but also too, the way in which we get individuals that are formerly incarcerated into our group, Justice League, is because we also run program in detention centers and in prisons. And so when And so Immortal is one of the artists, as well as my son, who go into the detention center with me to run program and bring hope to the young men and women that are incarcerated. And so as soon as those youth are able, and Melody as well, as soon as those young people are able to come out, we then make the connection for them to become leaders in our movement.
Yeah, I just want to underscore how great of a question that is, because it's really fundamental. Reverend Sekou said before that we're seeing this battle happen on two fronts, and one of them is the occupation of public space. And I'll challenge you to just notice, as you travel through the different areas and different neighborhoods, the amount of public space that's available. And I think if you pay attention, you'll notice that when you get into neighborhoods where most of the people start to look like me, and Immortal, and Carmen, and Mallory, and Daniel, you'll start to see less and less physical space. Yeah. And so we're criminalized for hanging out in the corners. Why is everybody on the stoop? But where's the park? Where's the rec center? Where's the meeting room where we can go and sit down together and be in community and talk about our issues and how we can move forward? And so for me, that means what I'd like to see out of my allies or my freedom fighters or people who, if your grandma owns land, because my grandma didn't own land, she probably worked some land, but didn't own it. I don't have the know-how. I don't know how to acquire land. I don't know what financial moves you have to make. I don't even know who to ask. So, you might not have all the money in the world, but you might have some information or some access to some information or access to some space. And those are the ways that we need to strengthen, we need to help each other, because we have to leverage our different roles, our different powers in order to get that space.
And I promise I won't say another thing. I just want to do one more piece on that, is that I swear I won't say another thing. But as being a youth organizer, when I was very young, we really met in the living rooms of all the parents' homes. That's how we got together and planned all of our activities. It was in the living room, and there was somebody there to cook. And I think that that's an important space for us that we've sort of gotten away from. Now everybody wants a space, a building, or whatever. But just going to mama's couch was where so much creativity came out, and where we became like family members, all the different young people together. And if somebody didn't have a place to stay, it was easier for my mom to figure out that the kid leaving didn't have a destination. She could tell just by them hanging out to be the last one leaving. It's a little different when you're in a building or a church, you gotta go, and then people just disperse into the street. But when someone was constantly saying, can I spend the night? Or just kind of hanging out, she then was able to tell that there was an issue. And the reason I'm just bringing that up to say that when we're talking about building safe spaces, it's so much that can happen if we as a community bring people into closer, more comfortable space. And I think that's what the sister's saying. Open up your home to allow people to be able to come there. You find out so much and help them be able to lead with clarity and comfortability.
Yeah.
Whoever else. But, as a clergy person, I thought about this, and I'd like to know how do I prevent from showing up late to situations. I've always thought that what the hell are you showing up now after a situation like Mike Brown and Trayvon Martin? So what can I do as a clergy person to not be that person who's late?
My first instinct is to tell you to quit the craft, right? So I just resigned from my pulpit. So I may not be the best person to answer the question in terms of, because I think I might be wrong. Like, every day I want to call my congregation and tell them I made a terrible mistake and can I come back? So I think, so for me, I theologically, I'm more interested in the communion of protest and the sanctuary of the street. That there might be something happening, and Daniel's helped me out think a lot about Durkheim's notion of collective effervescence. Something happens when we gather in the street. And there's something holy, not necessarily connected to a holy other, right? But there's something holy and sacred happens when we're protesting and confronting the powers together. So I'm going to try to experiment. Now, I might be wrong. So y'all might see me in somebody's pulpit in about a year. You know what I'm saying? But so I think that one of the first things that Tracy Blackman did when she first called the march in Ferguson was to repent. So she called all the preachers together on West Florida and she said, first we need to repent for not having been here for you. Because the black church for the most part is right-wing, reactionary, and conservative and has betrayed black children. Right? That's the, you know, and I can say that I'm fourth generation and I'm third generation in this tradition, right? So they betray. And I think it's often, what are your pre-existing relationships? So it's just not showing up when the crisis. But when you know, and it's to say that this has been my motto. I don't care what our young people do. They can bust windows out, burn down goddamn blocks. And when you see me on TV, I'm gonna fucking defend them, because they mine. I don't care what they do. Now I'm gonna curse them out behind closed doors. But they mine. And so part of it is that and the only legitimacy I have as I ain't no elder, I'm just old. The only legitimacy which is tenuous that I have on the streets in Ferguson have been the fact that I'll never shit talk them in public, and I'm going to stand with them and show up for them. Even when they do the craziest action. They just went outside this white woman's house, the Jennifer Joyce, the city attorney. They decided they're going to go protest outside this white woman's house. Right? Now I disagree with them. I was like, you crazy for going outside that white woman's house. In the largest concentration of police officers in St. Louis, Missouri. You out your mind. And they got their asses told. Pepper spray, hog tied, beaten, all of that. But I'm going to stay up 48 hours getting our babies out of jail. And I ain't going to talk shit about them, even though I disagree with guys. So what is your pre-existing relationships with young people? How are you going to put yourself in proximity of what they're doing? And then lastly, when they coming for our babies, will you get in between the powers and our children and protect them? And I think those become the questions that I'm trying to wrestle with and live out, and I make mistakes on every day.